thank you. We're trying to do the best work we can. But I'll tell you, we've also been accused of wasting time here and there a little bit. It's happened. We can.
Hasn't happened in a while.
Hasn't happened in a while. Yeah.
We've gotten better at getting to the point, I guess. Yeah.
Have we? It sure doesn't feel like it sometimes.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to True Crime Unsolved. I'm Miles Reeve. I'm here as always with my buddy Sean Cahill. This is the place where we tackle the stories that the TV networks won't touch. Unsolved homicides, missing persons cases, stories without an ending. Sean, what are we getting into today?
A long-awaited comment react video. We've heard from a couple of you guys that you've missed these, and trust me, nobody's missed doing this more than us. It's been kind of a crazy month, I think, for Miles and I's schedules in our other life outside the channel. But we're back on this, and we will always come back to this. We love hearing your guys' thoughts and reacting to them. So you had a lot to say. Before we dive into it, I did want to point out this channel has grown significantly over the past couple of weeks since we did our last update. We've actually attracted some sponsors that we're going to be integrating into some upcoming videos, which is really exciting for us because it's just more support for what we're doing. It allows us to work harder and longer and all that good stuff on this channel. So yeah, that's kind of the channel news. We're happy to be back and doing this. Right, Miles?
Absolutely. Stoked that so many new people are tuning in. We've got a lot of new subscribers. The Rico Harris video has gotten a lot of views. So it feels like we're in a really good place, and we appreciate all of you guys. And thank you for the support. Having said that, let's get into it. So the Idea Place. Thank you. Always appreciate your comments. This is about the Rico Harris video that we put up. I missed if Rico was doing drugs again. Obviously, drinking would loosen his resolve, so he likely backslid on drugs too. Maybe on this trip he had a realization that he was never going to fully recover from the state, that the job would likely fail since one can't hold a job with these issues, and that his girlfriend would likely reject him in this backslidden state too, and decided to stay where he was just to get by with no expectations. One would think he'd want his car, wallet, phone. That's the only thing that makes me think something happened to him. Like someone ran him over or took him off for some reason and did away with him. Not a lot of alternatives here. It's possible. I mean, look, the drinking, we know the bottle was there. We know that he had an empty bottle in the car. We know that there was another bottle. So he was obviously planning to do more drinking. You could say that he was on a little bit of a bender, which would definitely have been a relapse. Were drugs involved? There's no way to know. There was no evidence of that. I will say that. Nothing was found in the car. There were no pill bottles or anything. Any of the stuff that we know that Rico was known to have used back in the day when he was using, nothing like that was found. There aren't a lot of alternatives. I mean, other than, I guess, what we laid out in the video, which is, perhaps he is out there somewhere. I'm not suggesting that Rico's alive, and sort of like, as I think I said this in our case breakdown, that like maybe, Rico's become like the wild man of Yolo County. Like I don't think that that's a strong possibility, but I do think that there's a possibility that Rico did expire somewhere out there in the wilderness, and that because it is so vast that perhaps he hasn't been found in all of these searches. But I think what you're saying, Idea Place, about maybe he got picked up, ended up somewhere else, and something else happened to him, that's probably just as possible. Honestly, what do you think, Sean?
Yeah, no, I think it's true. I mean, one of my big questions in this whole thing is, like, we know that he had a backslid on the drinking, right? Like we talked about, but whether or not drugs came into play, to me, it would be kind of hugely consequential. If there was evidence, like maybe we found a pipe or something in that car, I would be thinking, okay, this guy probably got really whacked out on drugs and walked into the wrong place, and that's what happened. And that's still on the table. It's just that we don't have that evidence. I mean, we know that he passed through Sacramento shortly before he got to this location. That's a place you could score. I mean, he could possibly have spent a little time there looking for something and found it, but without finding anything to prove it, all we have is the alcohol. And it's like, who knows? It does seem like something was in retrograde for him, right? Like he was sober, and this isn't what he was supposed to be doing. This is a relic from a really troubling and difficult time of his life. He had just come from a visit with his mother. something hadn't gone well for him there. We don't know exactly what, but what was his headspace like? That's what I'm driving at, where things are weird with his family. He's moving to a new town. He decides to stop in this remote location and relapse with at least alcohol, possibly more. Maybe he did decide to just walk into the woods.
Yeah, and I think sorry to cut you off,
Oh, no, right.
but you just made me think of something, which is that we got some comments that sort of connected Rico's disappearance with the comments that his mother had made about the last time they had talked, and that perhaps kind of alluding to the fact that maybe that had set him off in a bad direction. And I think you have to look at the whole picture, right? Like, this is a guy who had rebuilt his life. He obviously was a bit of a fragile person. He had some issues, and he had worked hard to get where he was. But like, as anyone who has any friends who have been in recovery know, this is a constant struggle, right? Here he is, like, finally making this big move. I'm going to take on all this responsibility. I'm going to move in with this woman who we've been talking about having kids. I've got like job interviews for jobs. I've been working these kind of like low level security guard jobs for years. And now I'm actually like setting up interviews with higher positions. I'm taking on the responsibility of moving in with my girlfriend. That could put a lot of pressure on someone. Especially when they've been living like sort of, just day to day for a long time and just, sort of in survival mode. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, I'm going to start a new life. Especially if you're not built for that and you haven't been used to that kind of stuff. You're about to take on a bunch of responsibility. I don't know that it necessarily has to tie into him and his mom not having the perfect conversation before he left. If Rico was set off in a certain direction, if he did go into a darker place mentally and emotionally, I don't necessarily have to pin it on the convo that he had with his mom.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the conversation with the mom is easy to get distracted by, but I think it's actually just one small part of a bigger story, which is about a guy trying to figure out where he's going in life and trying like hell to put his demons behind him. He had a lot of trouble with that. A lot of arrests, a lot of issues with substances, and then a lot of work to get sober, like a lot of work to get sober. It did not come easy for Rico. And so that is all in context here. This thing with his mom is one conversation, but it does show, maybe where his head was at that day. It seems like there was something important he wanted to do in that conversation that didn't happen. And he decides to take this very, very, very long, 1,100-mile drive on very little sleep and start drinking again after all that work he had done. I don't think that was set off by the conversation with the mom. It seems like this is like momentum of something building in a certain direction. I think everyone was a little puzzled when they found those alcohol bottles in his car. His girlfriend, his mom. It just seemed like that wasn't where Rico was at anymore. And it adds this layer of mystery to what happened to him, because it seems like there was something going on with him that maybe nobody really understood or knew. You know what I mean? And that's why I think it's interesting to me. What was really in his head that day? What makes me wonder is, again, the fact that it seems like he returned to the area after he had been reported missing, right? There's footprints found in his size. Like, he came back looking for the car. There's sightings of him potentially that people report. So what do you make of that? Normally I would say he fell in with somebody, right? Somebody found him there. There was a disagreement. Maybe they killed him and moved him. But that doesn't really jive with him returning to the area and being seen.
Well, or again, he didn't want to be found. He was sort of lurking, right? Because, as you said, like there is an eyewitness report of seeing him after the searches had happened. So you would imagine that it was kind of like, lurking around, like not wanting to be caught or not wanting to be found, I should say, because he hadn't done anything wrong. Mm-hmm. But what does that mean? That lends itself to he wandered off, and perhaps the elements did get him eventually. Perhaps he is out there somewhere and his remains just haven't been found. Or, again, like Idea Place said, maybe someone picked him up. Maybe he ended up in a bad place. I mean, anything can happen out there on the road.
Absolutely. Well, let me get into this next comment, because I think it kind of picks up where the Idea Place left off. So this is KG Penguin. Hey, KG, one of our favorites, a subscriber and a member, which we love. So KG says, I agree with you guys. I feel like he may have overdosed and he may have died in a remote area, or possibly he decided to start a new life somewhere else. Either way, a very sad situation for someone who had such a promising future. So I don't think we need to retread the ground about, what happened to him. We just had a long little chat about that. But I like this comment because it really narrows in on what's important here, which is that this is a guy who did have a future. He had fought so hard to get to the point where he was going to have a future. For many years of his life, you have to remember, Rico, I think, was 37, 38 years old. I don't have it in front of me, but around that age, this is a guy who was just getting really off and running at that point because he had so many struggles up to that point. But at 37, he had this great job interview for something that would have been really life-changing. He had this girlfriend that was very serious. He's moving to a new town. Like, this is supposed to be Rico o'clock for him. Like, this is the moment where things change for you and they get better. And so, like, it's a tragedy, obviously, because that's the moment that he disappears and, he never gets to realize that future. It's a tragedy, but it's also a mystery. And it makes it a big question of, like, if he did wander off, why, when things were going well, finally, right? Like, what is it that we don't know if that's what happened? Or is that what happened, or was it something else, right? And he didn't want to disappear. And this would have been as alarming and upsetting to him as it is to everybody who looks at it. I don't know.
Well, speaking of something else, our old friend Larry, aka Coney Island, says, "I am seriously leaning to UFO abduction. How else can someone that is that visually identifiable just disappear?" And then he says, "Believe." I mean, listen, I know Larry personally. I know that he has a good sense of humor. But I also don't know that necessarily that he's joking here. And look, we have spoken to family members of people who have disappeared they get so frustrated that they're like, "Look, I think my kid was abducted by a UFO." It's not the first time we're hearing something like that. I mean, anything's possible. I do appreciate that he has pointed out Rico's size and this sort of like easily identifiable aspect of him, right? That he was such a tall, large man, and it's so hard to mistake him, which does make me believe the eyewitness accounts of seeing him, which does make me think that he was still around after the searches had been done. So yeah, what the heck happened to him? Was it a UFO? I'm not going to say no.
We don't know, right? Nothing's off the table until it's off the table. I would guess it's probably something a little more terrestrial, but I can't prove it, and I don't know. This stuff is truly, truly unusual and weird. This case in particular just really has me scratching my head, especially because I don't think we've seen another case, Miles, where someone disappeared and then appears to have come back even after they were searched for and people were looking for them in the area. Like, how does that even happen? I don't know. Yeah. That's a unique element here that I don't
definitely
know what to do with.
Yeah, no, the accounts of him actually being seen afterwards. I mean, sometimes you get that like years later, but that's usually after a case becomes really high profile and it sort of takes on a life of its own, and then strange people kind of attach themselves to it and start coming up with weird eyewitness accounts to sort of insert themselves into the story. This was so fresh and it was so close to when it was actually Rico's actual disappearance that I don't think that's what we're dealing with here.
No, I don't think so. I mean, like you said, there's plenty of people who swear that they, had brunch next to Tupac in Costa Rica, but that's not really credible. This is difficult to imagine, right? It's the middle of nowhere. No one walking around really looks like Rico. I mean, like this guy's going to stick out unless you're at an NBA game, right, where everyone's like 7 feet tall.
Right.
It's going to be hard to mistake for somebody else. All right, 100%. Let's move on. Don Lee, one of our favorites, also a channel member. What's up? Thank you for that. Don says, "It seems crazy that somebody that size would just disappear into thin air. If he was drinking and wandering around in a rugged area, maybe he fell and succumbed to the elements and his remains have just not yet been found. It's heartbreaking for the mother and the girlfriend." Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's kind of what we've been talking about. It's really hard to imagine somebody like that not being found, even if it's just their remains in a river or in a cave. But then again, you also have to remember, for as big as Rico is, the wilderness is also really big and really vast, and it can be difficult to find people, even with dogs and helicopters, technology. If this guy fell into a crevasse or something like that, which is probably more of like an Arctic problem, but if there's rocks that you can fall into, all kinds of weird things in nature that we don't really account for. And sometimes people are found decades or even hundreds or even thousands of years after the fact. You read these stories about hikers finding a skeleton that belonged to, a Paleolithic person who got wedged between a boulder and a cave entrance or something. It happens. And that guy's just been sitting there for thousands of years until finally some people in 2026 come along and locate him.
It's true. There was who's the guy that was found in the bog in England?
Yeah, the Piltdown Man or the Peat Bog
Exactly.
Man, or like, yeah.
I saw him when I was in the UK. I mean, and you look at that and you're like, this guy was just sitting there this whole time, like just thousands of years.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's really crazy, and it happens.
Possible. Look, the nature is it's nature's a mysterious thing, and it's not like disappearing in a city or something like that, or even look, the woods, I think, are a very, very particular environment, and like you mentioned earlier, Sean, like being in the desert, it's a lot harder to disappear in the desert unless someone's burying you in a hole than it is to disappear in dense woodland. It's a very very different scenario.
Yeah, and if you look at where Rico was, where it kind of is like climbing up into mountains, and there's canyons and streams and caves, and it's like there's some places where you could go that you might not be found for a very, very long time, and it's possible that's what happened. I do go back and forth between maybe something like that, and maybe he wandered around there for a while, but actually did meet some people and took a ride with somebody, and then it went south, and that's why we haven't found him in the area. I just don't know. It could go one of a couple ways here.
Yeah. I mean, look, my hope is that Rico's out there alive somewhere. My instinct tells me that's not the case.
I agree.
All right, we're gonna move on. We're gonna actually, these are we got a couple of comments about Casey Pitzer. The Idea Place again. Thanks for the comment. Thanks for interacting so much on the channel. We appreciate it. Jumping out of that car itself shows a survival instinct to keep oneself safe. Then to go jump in a pool to drown oneself, hardly. Does anyone know the character of these two men that were sent to get her? Given all the evidence that legally is supposed to be kept according to protocol that was trashed, it smacks of a cover-up, which seem to be far more common these days than is acceptable. Oh man, there's a lot to unpack there. So, I think everything that you're saying, Idea Place, about the survival instinct to jump out of the car, it does, and then jumping into this body of water, I agree. The story that these guys are telling, that Casey jumped out of their car and then ended up like in this body of water on her own, is a bit odd. I will say that. I mean, again, depending on her state of mind, depending on her sobriety, depending on, the darkness out there, anything's possible, right? But you would imagine that, like, if they're telling the story that the girl thought we were dangerous, so she jumped out of a moving vehicle, and then she ran and jumped into a body of water and drowned, that seems a bit odd. Does anyone know the character of these two men that were sent to get her? Ooh. That's so we do know some things, Sean, right?
Yeah,
about what their backgrounds and what's happened since.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just call it out straight out. I mean, the Brandon Reed had been accused and charged with sexual assault, several years earlier, of a minor. What happened in that case is it was eventually sort of negotiated down to what was it? Contributing to the delinquency of a minor, right? Because it was an incident involving substances given by him, an adult, to a person under 18. There was allegations of some sexual misconduct there, but I don't think that part was ever proved in court. And so I will say, look, make of that what you will. But if we're talking about somebody's character and that's in their background, you might want to know that, right? If you're going to hire this guy to come to your house and babysit, that would be a character point I would want to know about. Or if I'm a woman like Casey, maybe getting in a car with a guy like this, that would be a character background piece that would be relevant to me. So I don't really know about the other guy, but Brandon Reed, that's enough already right there. Of course, we've heard from the family and from some other people connected to this case, other sort of anecdotal stuff about these guys and not being good guys and all that stuff. But none of it is something that I know firsthand personally. And so it's sort of like not my place to come down and judge them for anything other than what we know about this one story and that, prior little incident that Brandon had, which is all documented in court and everything like that. Like that's obviously public knowledge. So.
There's one more thing in the Idea Place's comment that I think we should address, which is given all the evidence that legally is supposed to be kept according to protocol that was trashed, it smacks of a cover up. Yet nothing can explain what happened with the evidence in this case. I think that's a very valid point. Was it just, sort of like bad handling on the part of the authorities? Quite possibly, Was there some other reason that they didn't want, the truth getting out, or the whole story getting out, I should say? It's just as possible. We don't know.
It's one of those things where it was either a long string of unfortunate coincidences and gross, sort of mishandling, like you said, or it was intentionally done, right? And these things were destroyed or taken away or hidden for some purpose. I don't know, to protect somebody, to make sure that this doesn't get properly investigated or prosecuted, which is obviously, if you've seen our interviews with Casey's family and their advocate, Daryl, that's what they think, right? They're very clear about that. So yeah, unfortunately, it's really hard to tell what the cause is. All we know is that stuff is missing, a lot of important stuff. The clothes she was wearing, autopsy photographs have been heavily edited. The photographs of her boots at the side of the pond, gone, right? Why are they not there? That's such an important part of the case, which actually Idea Place you talk about, and it really stuck out to me in your comment. You're right. This woman is trying to get herself safe. She's jumping out of a moving vehicle to get away from danger. So why then climb over a fence on a freezing cold night, remove your shoes, and get into a body of water? That's hardly safe, right? So without the photographs, is somebody trying to hide something there, or did somebody just legitimately lose that? It's very weird. Very weird.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the very least, we could say that, evidence was lost or mishandled that shouldn't have been. And that in and of itself is a travesty.
Yep. And it makes it very hard to figure out the truth here.
Yeah. You want to take this next one?
Sure. Anthony Lazzaroni says, in all caps, so we know he's serious, I have always thought there is so much evidence that shows there was some foul play in this case. So it's funny. We're back to talking about evidence, and Anthony's saying that even the evidence that we have shows foul play, or there's enough to sort of point in that direction. There's enough evidence for me to say that this investigation seems like it should be far from over. I'll say that. I'm not sure that you could take what we have right now into a courtroom and convince 12 random people that there was foul play, but you could probably convince them that this should be reopened and continue to be looked into, because it makes little sense to me that this would be an accident for the reasons we already talked about, right? But it seems like there's stuff that suggests foul play that could maybe be proved one way or the other. So why aren't we looking into that? These guys have come in multiple times to give polygraph tests. They've failed them. It seems like there's something about their story that is either being hidden or not being told truthfully. So what is that, and why? Why hasn't this car that they were in, this truck, been taken and searched and processed? That never happened. The list goes on. So I agree with the sentiment you have here. I'm not sure we could get a conviction at this point, but I certainly understand why Casey's family is so angry.
Yeah, there's a lot of smoke around this one. Heather CZ8YK, thanks for the comment, Heather. Good to see you on here. Thank you for supporting this father regarding his daughter's case. I would say unbelievable, but I cannot. I hope you hear from someone regarding tips, witnesses, etc. I was sickened when I heard your previous video on what was done to Casey. Thank you, Daryl. Keep on, and bless you all. Accountability. Yeah, agreed. And thanks for the kind words. Obviously, that's our mission here. Like as you guys know, anytime we can get access with the family, most of the cases that we cover, we do include interviews with the family. So we were very, very happy to platform Casey's dad. And Daryl obviously is doing amazing work out there. We're in contact with him about this. So yeah, if anyone's got anything, they can send it to us. We can get it to Daryl. The information directly to them is in the previous video. We can put it on this one too, in the notes below. But anyone have any information, please pass it on.
Well said. All right, so I'm going to read a comment, but also like a reply or two to that comment because it's kind of an interesting back and forth. So, Gin Book, that's a book that sounds fun to read, says, "Hi, Miles and Sean. Regarding Casey, I have a few questions for you. First, does Brandon or Mike have a connection to law enforcement? Second, after Casey's picked up by these two men, do they drive toward the retention pond or in a different direction? By the way, the maps are so helpful. Third, what was the condition of her boots when they were found? Were they muddy or wet?" Um, in response to that, Tara Pitzer, who I believe is a relative of Casey's, says Brandon's grandfather was the city manager. His mom and grandma also worked in that office, and Mike's stepfather towed for the city. And then she also says, and yes, the boots were sitting beside the pond. Let me just unpack what I can from this. So, first of all, thank you for complimenting the maps. We do try really hard to work with maps. I'm a big like visual aid person. I think they're incredibly helpful when I'm watching stuff and people use graphics to explain to my dumb brain what I'm actually supposed to be picturing. So I'm glad that's working for you, Gin Book. We're going to try to keep that up. Was Casey's car, was the car that Casey was in driven by these two guys going toward the retention pond? It was going sort of parallel to it. So these guys were going south along a highway, and the retention pond was off to the side. And so she, according to them, hopped out and would have ran towards it and then gone over a gate and into it. Is that really what happened? Is that really why she was there? That's only coming from them. It could be that it was a slightly different version of events, but yes, the car was in the vicinity of that pond. And then the boots, yeah, apparently the boots were sitting beside the pond. Apparently there was a photograph of them. That photograph has disappeared and it's never been made public and nobody knows where it is. So one more thing in this story that we're just sort of taking somebody's word for, right, Miles?
And to put like a little bow on the comments that we got on Casey this week, Ruru, hello Ruru, good to see you. Thanks for being a member and thanks for always supporting the channel. Ruru says, as they say, the math ain't mathin'. I think that's the general consensus with this case. Things just aren't adding up, right?
Yeah, definitely not.
So you guys may have noticed, I don't know if everybody checks the tabs on the bottom of our page, but sometimes we do put posts up. We'll make announcements. Sometimes if there's news with some of the older cases, we'll sort of put it there if we're not going to drop a full video. But I did put up a poll earlier today asking how everyone felt about this standalone case breakdown that we did for Rico Harris, because as Sean and I mentioned in that video, there are a few cases where we have spoken to the family, we have gotten in contact with them, but they don't necessarily want to appear on camera for whatever reason. Maybe they're burned out, maybe they're just not ready. There are people who are happy to have the stories of their loved ones told, but they're just not ready to sort of speak out publicly themselves yet. Which was the case with Rico. So we do have a few other ones like that we've kind of been keeping in the wings. And we put up this poll asking how you guys felt about the standalone. And, we've gotten some votes and we've gotten some comments. And the consensus overwhelmingly seems to be like, yeah, go for it. Give us these standalones. And some of the comments that we got on this, I'll start with the first one. It's Le Cowboy Urbain 227.
I love that.
The French urban cowboy there says, doesn't really matter. Both are good. Would love to hear your thoughts on Brianna Maitland. So we did start looking into that, actually, Le Cowboy Urbain. Thank you for putting that one our way. I know it's an older case. I think it's like 20 years old, but it does seem like there's been a lot of activity on it. It does seem like there was a private investigator that the family hired who actually wrote a book about it. So there's a lot of information out there and there's a lot of people who may be willing to talk. So we are going to get out there and see what we can find out and see if anyone wants to talk to us about that one. So thanks for the suggestion. And then Ling340 said, Ling with a Y, says, kind of like me, I'm Miles with a Y, you're Ling with a Y. So I'm good either way, but I sure miss your read the comments discussions. They were my favorite. Well, there you go. Here we are. Yeah, this is very meta because we're doing it right now. I'm reading a comment about the comments in the comments. So that's crazy.
It's a comment inception. Yeah.
Yeah, it's comment inception. And then the last one that we'll read for this one, and sorry, Sean, if I've just taken this over.
No, it's
Stephania5364 says, just to say, I discovered your channel recently, and you two are the best. Unlike True Crime Garage, both of you bring value. The captain is wasting time. All right, listen. You guys don't have to put down other channels in order to like our channel. But, you know, hey, I'll take any compliment we can get right now, and we appreciate it. You know, True Crime Garage guys do some great work. We appreciate being in the same space as them. But you know, maybe we are the best.
I remember I don't like, you know, usually listen to a lot of true crime, believe it or not, because we do so much of this that it's like, I always like my comparison is like, do you think that the guy who works in the bakery goes home and just eats a bunch of bread at night? Like probably not. He's probably sick of being around the bread, but maybe he does. I don't know. I don't. This baker's not going home and eating bread. But I have actually heard these guys in the past, and I thought they were pretty good. I guess the captain must be one of them. You know, we're not here to shade other channels, so if they're doing good work, that's awesome. We're more interested in the compliment to us, though, like Miles said. Thank you. We're trying to do the best work we can. But I'll tell you, we've also been accused of wasting time here and there a little bit. It's happened. We can.
Hasn't happened in a while.
Hasn't happened in a while. Yeah.
We've gotten better at getting to the point, I guess. Yeah.
I guess so. Yeah. Have we? It sure doesn't feel like it sometimes. But we're doing our best, guys, and we love you all so much. Thank you for all these great comments. And like we promised at the beginning of the video, Miles and I love doing this because this is the lighter side of a channel about very sad stories. So this is actually like where we get to have some fun. We are committed to coming back and doing more of them. Honestly, for us, we want to do it every single week. And if we ever don't, it's because, you know, something really crazy is going on in our lives. We're traveling, we're working, whatever, it happens. But promise you, we're never dropping this part of it.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you this Friday.